So today we're doing the Gippsland Plains Rail Trail. Starting at Traralgon, finishing in Stratford, this follows the former Maffra railway line section of the Gippsland line, which is also known as the Orbost or Bairnsdale line.
Traralgon, we have got 22 minutes.
So armed with a V-Line paper ticket, as Stratford is too far out to have a Mikey reader, we wait for our train on the platform at Richmond Station. Thanks to a recent election promise, regional train fares are now the same price as city fares, a $9.20 daily cap, which cuts over $40 per person off the old price. At the old price it would have been cheaper to drive there with the bikes, and well, that's talking in the Land Cruiser. And we sure lucked out. Out of the 132 trains in V-Line's fleet, we've managed to get one of the 4 with no bike racks. The conductor said to just put them here, and if someone needs one of the wheelchair spots, we'll just move. So a 2-hour train ride later, and we're now in Traralgon, about 160 kilometres out of Melbourne. So we ride from the station to get to the start of the rail trail.
Gippsland Plains Rail Trail.
And on the edge of Traralgon, we find the trailhead. In this section it's primarily gravel with the odd bridge. There's 63 kilometres of this to Stratford and a lot to see on the way. First stop is Glengarry train station. The station and buildings remain as a cafe and art and craft shop. It opened in the 1840s, originally being called Latrobe Station, before being renamed Glengarry, after an alternative name that was originally proposed for the nearby Latrobe River. A small town that sprung up around the station, and today has about 1,000 people living there. In its day, it used to transport timber from the local sawmills, crops, milk, bales of wool, and even livestock from the nearby farms. It then closed in the 1970s when declining freight and passenger volumes made it no longer viable. Much less remains of our next stop, Toongabbie Station. Toongabbie was important as a source of supplies for the Walhalla goldfields. Goods were dropped off at the railway station here, but unfortunately for this town, Walhalla then got a direct railway connection. Today the town has about 500 people living in it, and the railway station closed in 1986. Cower Station opened in 1883 with the construction of the line out to Hayfield. Cower also has a history of providing goods for Walhalla, besides some farming here. Near the old Cower Station site, a former G-Class wagon that transported goods through this area back in the day stands here in memorial. But larger capacity wagons and the advent of shipping containers resulted in all of these trailers falling out of use.
Where's the UI here?
Yeah.
Just short of Cower.
Yeah.
Cower currently has a population of 368, and the railway station was serviced up until about 1977, with the station then being formally closed in 1986.
Oh! That was much more of a lift than I thought.
Dawson Station is here, in the bushes. Built quite close to Cower and Hayfield, it opened in 1883 and was intended to service towns to the north like Toomban, Donnelly's Creek and Glenmaggie. It was in fact originally called Glenmaggie, despite being 11 kilometres to the south of it, with most of that being completely impassable undeveloped bushland. Due to this causing much irritation among people who arrived there expecting to be able to go there, it was then renamed to Dawson, though it didn't last particularly long. Here you can see where the original rail bridge crossed the road. But the station didn't have a particularly long life. By 1891, due to a lack of traffic, it no longer had a station master. 1893 and the station building then burnt down, and they never bothered to rebuild it. Dawson was now downgraded to a siding. In the late 1930s, it averaged about 50 passengers a year, and by the late 1950s when it closed, that number was 7. And here we are at Hayfield, the former station now being a park. Formerly the end of the railway line when constructed in 1883, it was actually quite a busy station back in its day. In the 1950s, Victoria was suffering from a massive shortage of timber, the result of the 1939 bushfires close to Melbourne combined with post-war housing demand. 7 sawmills opened, and 2/3 of the timber from them was transported by rail. The population at its peak here was about 2,500, about 500 higher than today. Passenger services stopped in 1977, but freight continued until it was officially closed 10 years later in 1987. The next stop is Tinamba. In 1887, when it opened, crops were the primary industry in the region, eventually replaced with dairying. By the 1920s, the station was so busy that there were actually plans to extend it, but by the 1960s this hadn't happened and demand greatly died down. In 1973, the passenger platform was actually shortened. It then closed in 1987.
I'm just gonna curb it.
No, not this way.
It's unclear exactly where the path does go from here, so we're just going to take a little shortcut through Maffra, a town of just over 5,000 people, which makes it one of the bigger ones in the area. I think this isn't the right way either. No, wait, no, that's it. On the left, we have the old station building of Maffra Station. It opened in 1887, like a bunch of the others, and this one even got a second railway line, a spur to brag along, which opened in 1889. But only 3 years later, in 1891, a flood washed away the wooden bridge, and then it was rebuilt and reopened later that year. It was then destroyed again in 1893, before they decided to rebuild the bridge out of steel in 1895 and opened the line again in 1897. But despite the community's enthusiasm for having the railway line, passenger services on the Bryagalong line declined to the point that they were discontinued in 1930, with the line closing for good in 1952. Now the rail line to this point closed in 1987, but the occasional freight train did still come here from the other direction, until it finally closed in 1993. Powers Court siding was used to load up sugar beet from nearby farms here, but it never really had a permanent service as such, also closing when the rest of the line did. And then, at this point, my first battery is flat. I'm keeping up 28k an hour fine on the flat, well, until it starts to go uphill again, so I stop and change it over. Now, it probably should have made the distance, but that was the smaller battery of the two, and after a few years, maybe it is getting a bit worn out. And then we arrive at Stratford, located on the Avon River. Okay, nobody actually knows exactly why this town was named Stratford, but a leading theory certainly is that it was named such so that it would be Stratford upon Avon, the town sign certainly alluding to that. Though one small issue with that is that this Avon River was actually named after the one in Scotland, not the one in England. But does that really disqualify it?
That doesn't look like a path.
And then we reach Stratford Station. which is still operational. Well, this one is a little unusual in that both ends of it actually have rail service.
Oh, yeah, where the Mikey should be.
What we rode down was the route between Traralgon and Stratford, but the rail between Traralgon and Stratford that still exists just goes via Rosedale and Sale. So the plan was to take the train back from Stratford, hence the paper ticket, as we're now way too far out for Mikey cards to be accepted. But we're way earlier than we thought we'd be, and if we get back in a similar time to when we got out here, we could get back to Traralgon in time just to get the train from there with time to spare. Certainly beats waiting around here for a couple of hours. And it was going pretty well initially.
Okay, ETA now says 16:04. When's the train again? It's at 5:30. Oh, double espresso plus 100 milligrams caffeine. That's what I need.
But then the weather turned. Faced with a massive headwind, it became much harder to ride.
This gives me Afton Street Reserve flashback vibes.
And then it got worse. It started to rain. Faced with the horrible mechanical noise coming from behind me, I stopped, clearing the stick from the chain tensioner and checking that nothing was broken. No, seems all good. Let's carry on. So I've turned the e-bike right down to be able to conserve power so I don't run out before we get back. But it was to no avail. It still managed to run out entirely. So riding a slow heavy bike with no power assistance back into Traralgon in the fading light, towards the train station where I hoped to catch the train. And to make things worse, I'd now been informed that the following two trains had just been cancelled and replaced with bus replacements, which, well, either won't allow you to take the bike on board, or if they will take it, will stick it in the cargo area at the bottom of the bus, unsecured, and have it sliding round the entire trip, and then when it's unloaded, well, you'll probably get it back in multiple pieces. There was no spare time to get anything to eat, and we hear a train arriving. Which, you know, can't possibly be the train to anywhere else. There it is, that's the train. Now that was close. Well, we made it. Just. And this train does actually have the bike racks. So back to Richmond Station and time to ride home from there with a completely flat e-bike. Well, it could be worse, at least my light's not flat. So for more off-road adventures on 2 and 4 wheels, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and see you next time.